All right. Thanks for coming to this briefing today. I appreciate it. Obviously, we've had a lot going on in the Tri-Cities here the last couple of weeks. The first thing I wanted to start out with is we've had several big cases here recently, and I want to just kind of reiterate a point that we started this particular investigation 3 days ago. It's 3 days after the fact, and now we're releasing information. This incident, as well as all the other incidents and many incidents in the past and many in the future, we really have to be very sensitive about the information that we're releasing and the timeliness of it. One, we don't want to jeopardize our investigation. I know that the news cycle is important. We get that information out there as quick as we can, but we also have to balance the importance of conducting a good investigation and not sacrificing the integrity of it. The other piece of that is sometimes we have to withhold information till later because we could be actively pursuing after suspects, and we don't want to release too much information that would make those that are attempting to apprehend suspects jobs more difficult than they already are. So that's why today you released, in particular to this incident, you've received some very vague news releases because it was a very, very active investigation, and we really did not want to jeopardize the apprehension of the suspect in this case, and it proved, our tactics proved to work out well in this. The second thing, so reference to the Buchanan, this briefing is in reference to the homicide that occurred on South Buchanan. I did want to just initially start out and thank the Benton County Prosecutor's Office. Andy Miller and his office were outstanding in helping us to put together critical legal elements that we needed to be able to apprehend a suspect, and they were there from the very beginning, helping us walk through that process so that we can eventually effect an arrest. We'd also like to thank the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab for their repeated assistance in helping us be able to gather evidence and document scenes. They are always really great and quick on the spot to come down and give us a hand. This particular scene, as I'll denote a little bit, was quite involved. They spent a couple of days on scene gathering and documenting evidence, and it was quite involved. We'd also like to thank the United States Marshal task forces from the region. One's from Vancouver, Yakima, and our local U.S. Marshals Task Force assisted in the apprehension of a suspect in this case. They are always great partners, and they always do great work. And lastly, and this will come into play as well, we definitely have to thank the Skamania County Sheriff's Office for their assistance in the apprehension of a suspect in this case as well. So, and Skamania will come into play here as I lay out the narrative, but I did want to thank them as well. So they're great partners, and we're more than willing to help us and are still continuing to help us in the investigation. So timeline-wise, on May 3rd, at about 2:15, the Kennewick Police Department was called to 440 South Buchanan Street here in Kennewick for suspicious circumstances, in which the housekeeper arrived at the residence and located a deceased male. The male was later identified as Clayton Wick, 76 years old, and he is the resident of the home. There were sufficient circumstances and evidence that helped us that led us to believe that the death was not caused naturally, and that he was the victim of a homicide. Our Criminal Investigations Division, our detectives, were called to the scene, and upon arrival discovered a very violent scene. A violent interaction had occurred within the home. We called in the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab due to the magnitude of evidence and documentation that needed to occur within the location. And as before stated, they came down and spent a couple of days, long days, documenting, collecting evidence, and doing what they need to do. About that same time, during that same time period, our detectives continued to pursue after leads, investigate tips and leads that they had received, And in that process, early on in the process, they determined that the victim's vehicle had actually been stolen or taken from the residence. It was a 2012 green Honda CRV that was registered to the victim. We obtained information on who was possibly in possession of that vehicle, and probable cause was then established to put out an arrest warrant for the suspect for auto theft. The suspect at that time was identified as Christopher Calvert, 44 years old. He is a Hermiston, Oregon resident. That was a nationwide warrant for auto theft, and again, the prosecutor's office helped us to facilitate that. After a short time later, within the next day, additional evidence and testimony was obtained, and we were able to establish probable cause for first-degree murder of Mr. Wick, and Mr. Calvert was the suspect in this incident. The Benton County Prosecutor's Office helped facilitate in issuing a first-degree murder warrant with aggravating circumstances on a nationwide $1 million bond warrant for the apprehension of Mr. Calvert. Additional regional resources, law enforcement resources were employed to be able to determine and locate Mr. Calvert. Investigative means led us to Mr. Calvert residing temporarily in Stevenson, Washington, which is a small community about 1 hour east of Vancouver, Washington. The United States Marshals Task Forces from Vancouver, Yakima, and from our local area, as well as KPD detectives in the Skamania County Sheriff's Office, sought to locate Mr. Calvert in Stevenson. They located him still driving the victim's vehicle. He had switched plates off of it, but it was the same vehicle. And when they went to stop him, a pursuit ensued, and they pursued the suspect, Mr. Calvert, through Stevenson out into a rural part of Skamania County. The pursuit lasted 4 or 5 minutes, and one of the law enforcement vehicles was able to force Mr. Calvert into a ditch where he became stuck. Mr. Calvert was arrested after that on the warrant for first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances, and he was taken to custody without any further incident. At this time, we do not believe that. Well, what we believe is that that Mr. Calvert and Mr. Wick actually were acquaintances of one another, and that we believe that Mr. Wick's death was caused by a violent assault and blunt force trauma, but an autopsy will further reveal in the future of what that means, his actual cause of death. It was a violent scene, and like I said before, there was a substantial amount of evidence and documentation that needed to occur to be able to help continue to build this case. This case is not over. The Kennewick Police Department detectives will continue are going to spend several weeks, if not months, investigating the scene and processing the evidence and processing all everything that's going to come in. And one of the things that we would like to ask is it anybody that Mr. Calvert contacted and talked about this crime with? We'd like them to reach out to the Kennewick Police Department, and we'd like to talk to them about the types of information that he revealed to them. And obviously, if anybody else has information about the incident, obviously we want them to contact us, or they can leave information at our kpdtips.com. He was booked into the jail last night for first-degree murder and auto theft. The first-degree murder does carry some aggravating circumstances as well, which means something in the legal world. So I think that's everything. Does anybody have any questions?
Do we know the nature of the beef between the two that led to this?
Yeah, we're uncertain at this point. I don't know if we'll ever know, but we don't really know the particulars and details. We've heard rumors and ideas, but nothing that we can confirm.
Calvert, Calvert.
Yes. And after I'm done here, like I'm literally going to turn around, walk upstairs, hit the send button. You hit the send button. It's all made up. It's all done. So, and you guys will have all that stuff. But it is CALVERT.
Were they living together? Like, did he just come over? Any idea kind of what the details?
Don't know exactly. We don't believe that he was. We don't know for sure.
Okay.
But we know he was a Hermiston resident. That Mr. Calvert was a Hermiston resident, and we don't know if he stayed there from time to time or. But we do know that they were acquaintances of one another.
As for Stevensonville, that's where it is. Stevensonville, is that the name of it?
Stevenson, Noville. Stevenson, Washington.
Stevenson, Washington. I'm sorry. Do we know where he was living there? Do we know what he was doing there?
Visiting. Yeah, he was just visiting there. He wasn't necessarily staying. He didn't live there. He was just staying there.
Now, sorry, I didn't interrupt. Now, you brought up, you guys have been hearing rumors and stuff. One of the things that we heard was they met on the internet through some dating site. Is there any credence to that?
We don't know.
No?
Yeah, we don't have nothing that we're prepared to share because we just, we will spend the next several weeks, if not months, investigating. To get, access to that type of information requires warrants and, processing and digital forensics and all that kind of stuff.
So what was the, information that you guys received that led you to believe that they were some sort of acquaintances?
He has been seen there before.
Was it just one time or was it several times? Do you know off the top of the dome? Or?
At least one time.
At least one time?
Yeah,
okay.
So I don't know. I don't know all the particulars with all the information that was gathered in the area. But we have reason to believe that they were acquaintances, that this was not a random acquaintance, that they are acquaintances from the past.
Okay.
And he was 44 years old?
Yes, Calvert was 44.
Is Calvert in Benton County Jail?
Benton County Jail. Yep, he's in Benton County Jail. Yeah, we transported him back last night and booked him into the jail.
Do we know when his first court appearance is?
I don't. I don't know when that is. Probably next week, early next week sometime.
Is he on a 72-hour hold or is he officially charged?
He's on the warrant.
Okay.
Yeah, he's booked in on a warrant.
The state crime lab was there for a significant amount of time.
Yep.
The detectives were there. Talk a little about, how do you guys feel proud-wise about the work that the officers did? This was, like you mentioned, it was a pretty gruesome scene. It was, that's a lot of stuff for officers to go deal with. So, talk a little about maybe some of the pride that you guys feel for the officers involved and, in the investigation.
Yeah. It's hard to feel pride in a circumstance like this, right, when somebody's life was lost. But the crime lab, our detectives, everybody is involved in the investigation. They are very skilled at their craft, and they know that they are working for the justice for the victim and his family. And so they're professionals. They're pros, as we like to say. They're pros. And I don't know, it's always great to be able to build a case and to have justice served for victims of crime. And there's a little bit of satisfaction in that because that's what the citizens expect us to do, is to build cases, to collect evidence, to process it, to use the expertise that we have and the resources that we have to affect that. So I don't know if pride's the right word, but I think that the correct word is they're professionals. There's some satisfaction in knowing that they've fulfilled their responsibilities and what the expectations of the citizens want us to do, and that's to hold people accountable for committing crime. And in this case, Mr. Calvert, as at least we have done our part or continue our part to hold him accountable for committing a crime, a heinous crime.
Any idea? Any idea whether or not this involved drugs or like?
We don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. And we may never know that.
Yeah.
Because at this point we don't know. But again,
Any idea why he had been dead at that point?
We believe that he had been deceased anywhere between 3 and 5 days before we actually discovered him.
Now, Now you mentioned, you said the words violent assault. You mentioned blood force trauma. Were those the two key indicators that led you guys to believe there was a homicide that took place, or were there some other, pieces of evidence lying around the house that the crime lab noticed that indicated that as well?
Yes and yes.
Yes. And
Yeah.
Can you touch on any specific things
Not
that
really.
may have indicated?
Not really, because again, it goes back to the initial part of the conversation. We don't want to jeopardize, because we're going to have a jury pool if he decides to take it to trial. We're going to pull juries from this community, so we can't really disclose and taint evidence, right?
Okay.
But suffice it to say that it was a violent crime scene, and that's I'm not even over exaggerating that at all. That's part of our duties and our responsibilities. Any death that happens in a community has to be investigated by law enforcement. So we go to a fair number of death scenes and death investigations. And so if somebody dies from natural causes, most of the time you're like, yeah, this appears to be natural. This one was far from that. This one was clear and obvious upon entering the residence that it was a violent crime scene, and that the cause of his death was not natural.
Was there anything stolen outside of the car? Do you know if there was any credit cards or
Don't
anything
know.
like that? No?
Yeah, I don't. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that question.
Does Mr. Calvert have a history?
Not a huge extensive local history. I'm sure that as part of the investigation, they will determine history in the other communities that he's resided in the past.
I have one more question.
You bet.
Mentioned, there was a gruesome scene, things like that can really get to officers. How's
Yep.
the morale? How are they doing mental health-wise? Are they doing okay? Anybody, more or less say, hey, I might need somebody to talk to. Did you hear any of that from officers that investigated?
Not yet, because I think they're neck deep into, right, they are focused, they're professionals, they're focused on finding justice to the victim. But definitely that is a concern that we have in any of these types of cases. And our detectives really get neck deep in some pretty heinous cases, right? And we've learned a lot about officer wellness in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years. 20 plus years ago when we started, it was, suck it up, buttercup, you'll be fine, But we've learned a lot in the last 5 years, 10 years about the effects of this type of stuff on officers. And so we will definitely monitor that. We have resources in place and continue to build on those resources within the department so that the guys and gals at the Kennewick Police Department have the opportunity to be able to not let that stuff fester within them. Because, definitely when I saw some of the photos and stuff, I was like, yeah, we may need to have some conversations, and some people just may need to sit down, and those are totally normal things that we definitely want to take care of our folks, definitely. So thanks for asking that, because that's an important topic.
What time did you guys, or what time did they find him over in Skamania?
Yeah, it was about 3 o'clock-ish in the
3
afternoon.
o'clock.
Yeah. So that was on May 5th, so yesterday at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
2 days after the initial investigation.
The initial discovery of Mr. Wick, yeah.
And was he found driving around? I think he
Yeah.
was, okay.
Yeah, he was driving in a vehicle, and our law enforcement partners observed him, which ensued into about a 4 to 5 minute pursuit.
Now, with the pursuit and things like that, obviously we don't want to jeopardize any investigation. But did Calvert show any remorse or anything like that? I assume the officers have since talked to him to maybe get a read on him a little bit. Did he show any indications of remorse or anything like that?
What I will say is that I can make my own assumptions in the sense that he fled from us. Sorry, I don't know how remorseful that is, but I will say that one of the aggravating circumstances that was listed on the warrant was lack of remorse.
Okay.
So
Okay.
there was some premeditation, lack of remorse, and so like that were part of the aggravating circumstances listed on the warrant.
Okay. And what comes next? Obviously, the investigation is still underway. We're still kind of waiting for his first initial court appearance.
Yep.
So what's next for you guys in terms of this investigation?
Yeah, so we have a lot of evidence to process. We have a lot, which takes time now, right? It's like literally within the first 48, right? How we need to nab this guy up and put him where he needs to be. And so now you can kind of slow down a little bit. The detectives can get a little bit of rest now, right? They've been working long days, obviously with all the events that have occurred in the last couple of weeks in the Tri-Cities. So they're a little tired because they've been super busy. So we can kind of slow it down a little bit, gather evidence, and put it all together. Right? It's the freshness of the incident that's occurring. There's a lot of phone calls, and there's a lot of it's happening now. We can kind of slow things down a little bit now, take a look at the big picture, see where we need to fill in the gaps, and just and process evidence and cases and really solidify any other type of information. So it'll be busy for them.
Yeah, like putting the puzzle together.
Putting the puzzle together. Yeah, right now we just dumped the box out on the floor, and there's one piece that stood out, right, and then so we've got to put it all together now. So, and it takes time, because it's not like they're dedicated just to that one incident, right? They have other cases as well that they're working. So, but they're busy, so they do a fantastic job at juggling everything. So,
Good. Thanks.
Thank you, Lieutenant.
okay, good.